Hey everybody, it's Mitch and welcome. Today we have got another video for you, and today's video is actually a one where we're going to explain the Zelda timeline, because holy crap is that confusing. So yeah, let's get into that. Let me just pull that up here and boom. Alright, so let's start at the beginning. This is where it's nice and simple. It won't stay that way, as anyone who's familiar with the timeline will know. So you start off with, Skyward Sword. That's where you see the whole Legend of Zelda just really start. That's where you find out about how the goddess Hylia came down. That's where you find out about demise, and that's where you really start to see like how the goddess Hylia, who has reincarnated into human form as the Princess Zelda, and demise are like their fates are intertwined. So that's where you really first see all that. And this video will include where I think that Breath of the Wild fits, which is something that is hotly debated. Anyway, so then we move on to during the whole Skyward Sword arc, that's where you see the creation of Hyrule. That's where that starts. That's where really everything begins. You see the Legend of the People in the Sky, which does come up in later games, and a few other things. Then there's the Minish Cap, which is where you see the introduction of a new villain, the Sorcerer Vati. So there's a small world that's exists alongside Hyrule, and the Emperor Vati's a big part of that, and that's where you kind of get introduced to the land of the Minish, which is something that does come up later. Then, of course, there's Four Swords, where Vati comes back. So a little more with that. I'm not sure I've played that one, but it's fairly simple. I did play the first two. Then there's the Hyrulean Civil War, and this is when we get to the fun part: Ocarina of Time. So here's a theory that it's not really my theory. Another YouTuber actually came up with this theory. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I really liked it. I forget what her name was, but it's a really good video. If I could remember who it was, I would shout it out. If anyone knows who it is and leaves a comment, I can definitely do something in the comments if somebody points out who it was. I forget who it was, but the theory basically goes that the original timeline after Ocarina of Time is where the downfall timeline happens, because the timeline splits at Ocarina of Time, and basically at the first scene in Ocarina of Time where you see Ganondorf, that is where I believe, and I think I originally got it from this other YouTuber. Basically, what happens is the time Link died at that instant. Zelda never had that dream that she had when you meet her. She never had that, and you never have your dream. The Deku Tree maybe or may not have had his dream. So so basically things don't go so well, because Ganondorf just had a really good plan, and Demise and Ganondorf kind of win. But it's not all for everything. Give me a sec. Let me move myself over here. All right, so that's when you see like A Link to the Past, which I haven't played that one particularly. But you see, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, Link's Awakening. I haven't really played too much of this particular timeline, but from everything I've heard about it, basically what happens in this timeline is Link's going after the Triforce because because Ganon has it, and he's basically trying to trying to reclaim the Triforce from Ganon to save Hyrule. And somehow him doing that must put in motion something where Zelda is able to send a message back in time to her former self and possibly some other people, where they all have their dreams that you see in Ocarina of Time. At least that is the theory that I subscribe to on this. So that's what I believe is going on with this timeline. It's fairly straightforward. This much. It's a it's a little controversial whether or not this part's actually accurate or not, but that's how I see it. So yeah. Anyways, then what you see happen after that is you see that well, the hero is triumphant. Link wins. Ocarina of Time happens. The game plays out, but something happens at the end of Ocarina of Time. So throughout the course of Ocarina of Time, and I have played this game many times, from this point onward, I will have played like at least the vast majority of the games. Now, basically, what happens is, Link, the hero of time, he goes and after having his dream where he sees Ganondorf, he eventually runs into Ganondorf and replays that moment, but is able to survive the attack Ganondorf throws at him. In addition, the Deku Tree has a dream, and that sets some things in motion. Zelda also has a dream, and that sets some things in motion. But I really do believe that attack that you see, that Link survives from Ganondorf, the downfall timeline, that he doesn't survive that attack. So yeah, but in this one he does. He goes in. At that point, he'd already collected all the Spirit Stones. When Ganondorf did it, he would have obviously taken the Spirit Stones and then, entered the Sacred Realm and obtained the Triforce. But this time he doesn't. Link ends up getting sealed. Ganondorf takes the Triforce, and then you move on and you go to the future and you defeat Ganondorf in the future and stop him. Where you stop him, that's where Ganondorf is sealed. But then Zelda decides, you being sealed and missing your childhood, that's just too cruel. So she sends you back in time 7 years in order to be able to have your childhood. But this creates a rift in the timeline. That act of Zelda's to decide to show pity on Link, the hero of time, and let him have his childhood, causes this rift. And it's honestly probably terrible for Link, in all honesty, because yeah, he got to have his childhood, but the deeds that he did as the hero of time, nobody knows about. Well, they do. Lots of people do, but they're in a different timeline. So all the people that he's around, that from his timeline, he's just some kid. They don't really have that respect for him, that he earned, because he did it in a different timeline. And yeah, it also causes some interesting things to happen, and we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that right now, actually. So basically, after Link goes back, he decides and he heads off to Termina. I actually haven't played much of Majora's Mask, but I'm familiar enough with it, just because it's hard not to be. So basically, he goes off to Termina and he goes and stops the moon from crashing down. Whether or not Termina is even real, that's a whole thing. But he stops that, and it's presumed that he does end up going back to Hyrule. Now, I would say that, and this is a fairly common theory, he ends up, playing a big role in Ganondorf's being sealed. Years later, Ganondorf, probably brings an army. There's all sorts. I think there's a war that happens. It's a whole bunch of stuff happens, but in the end, Ganondorf ends up being sealed in the Twilight Realm by the Seven Sages. But in the process, he ends up killing them all, and the sealing, it only sort of works. So it's kind of problematic because somehow he did obtain the Triforce of Power. Not quite sure how he got that. My guess is maybe something with Link getting the blade later. I don't know. That much is really hard to figure out. But I'm pretty sure he does get the Triforce of Power because I do recall seeing it in the cutscene, which isn't really well explained, in all honesty. But yeah, so somehow he gets that, and he's able to take over the Twilight Realm. Meanwhile, I believe our hero of time here, something must have happened because I believe he ends up as a Stalfos that ends up teaching our new hero of Twilight the all the sword techniques. So that seems to be a thing that happens, which Twilight Princess is certainly interesting. You see the whole everything with the Twilly and everything. It's yeah, it doesn't relate much back to anything else, but certainly is interesting. That's also where you see Four Swords Adventure come back sometime after. Before we get to that, Link ends up defeating Ganondorf and basically slaying him. Ganondorf had, Beast Ganon, so he definitely had the power of Ganon in that fight. That was one of the longest final boss fights in all of Zelda, in all honesty. So yeah, but Link does end up defeating him. Now, in Four Swords Adventures, you see Vati return, as well as Ganondorf, or at least Ganon. Hard to say. I think it's Ganon. It says Ganondorf there, but I'm pretty sure it's Ganon. They end up revived by someone, and basically it's kind of the end of the Minish era. So yeah, that's certainly an interesting one. But it's not even truly Ganon. It's just kind of it's just sort of the beast, which if we go back here, Ganondorf clearly at some point must have to Ocarina of Time. You see that he clearly must have merged with Demise. I believe the moment where he actually merged with Demise was when he was felled at the top of the castle. And then when he was revived as Ganon, that is when he became Demise. Or that was when Demise merged with Ganondorf to become Ganon. I believe that is the difference. That's my personal theory on how that all works. So yeah, that explains that. Now let's move me over here. All right. So then we move off to the the adult timeline, which is weird because the child era is, this one here, whereas here we have the adult timeline, which is the one where he's a child and all of it, which is confusing, but it's named after whether Link was a child or an adult at the end of Ocarina of Time. So basically, he was an adult when he defeated Ganon, so the timeline that split from that is the adult era, and then the child era is the era that came from when he went back and reclaimed his childhood, which he did do both. I had someone get confused and say that this was a split based on whether he decided to go back or not. No, he went back. It's just him going back split the timeline. So yeah. Anyways, in the child timeline, Ganondorf gets sealed, but the seal doesn't hold, and the people pray to the gods, and the hero never comes because the hero just disappeared after defeating Ganon. This is actually all. This part here is not a theory. This part is actually straight from Wind Waker's opening scene. This is one of the very, very few times in Zelda history where they actually explain in detail what happened. So, yeah. Ganon, after Link sealed him, Link the Hero of Time sealed him, eventually the seal started to weaken. And Ganon's last words when he was sealed were, he would curse you for all eternity, you and all your descendants. So, yeah. So that's a thing. Basically, what ends up happening is um, the seal weakens and weakens and weakens, and eventually Ganon's power starts to seep out. They keep praying for the hero to return, but he never does. So eventually they end up praying to the gods, and they just flood the whole world to try and keep Ganon in. And it works for a while. The whole world ends up flooded. Everyone ends up on islands, and the whole population of Hyrule is moved to islands that are all separated by a vast sea, and yeah, it all ends up just kind of turning into this whole water world situation that you see in Wind Waker. Then one day, Ganon's power starts to get strong again, and that's when when a new hero is born. And a kid on Outskirts Island, I believe is what it's called. He ends up he ends up becoming the hero of winds and saving Ganon. Not saving Ganon, well, sort of saving Hyrule, but he does end up helping Ganon initially. Much the case with a lot of games before it. So he ends up saving him, or saving the day. You find out that the Princess Zelda has been living as a pirate for a while, and her as Tetra. So that was a big shock. I mean, it's like this game's like so old now, but well, it was a big spoiler back in the day. Anyways, so you find out about that. Somehow the King of Hyrule is a boat. I don't know how that ended up being a thing. The one that made the wish to flood the world. Then you see. So eventually you end up fighting Ganondorf after a whole bunch of things go down. Lots of story involved in Wind Waker. And it ends up with the Triforce being reunited. Your Triforce of Courage, Ganondorf's Triforce of Power, and Zelda's Triforce of Wisdom are all reunited to form the complete Triforce. Ganondorf makes his wish, but he forgot to touch the Triforce when he made it, so it didn't happen. Because apparently you have to be touching it. He was like standing a foot away. Then the King of Hyrule, he happens to be touching it, and he makes his wish to flood the kingdoms of Hyrule. And then Ganondorf gets really mad. He's really not happy about that, and you end up with this like fight against him as the world's starting to drown, and he ends up and you end up running your sword through his head and turning him to stone. So yeah, you end up defeating Ganondorf and basically killing him. So that's kind of cool. I mean, you straight up turn him to stone, and you can like see the stone start to crumble and rot away from the water. He seems pretty well defeated. So yeah, that's kind of where we end with that. With this, sorry, that's not where this time ends. That's where Wind Waker ends. Then you see Link go off on an adventure, and Link and Zelda leave Hyrule. They run into a ghost ship along the way, and then they start a new event, and then they create a new kingdom somewhere else. And not even that many years later, like maybe 50 years later, some new kid that looks a lot like Link ends up befriending the Princess Zelda, and this new country that's all about trains for some reason. I don't know. It gets weird. But that's kind of what happens after that. It's pretty disconnected from the story, in all honesty. So that's what we have for now. But I did promise you I'd be saying where I see Breath of the Wild being. And, well, there is a line in Breath of the Wild. There's a cutscene. And I've heard it's well known. And I believe that is really the key. And it's really obvious to me where it goes. So you see a thing that says whether skyward bound, steeped in something in time, or something in twilight. I forget the exact words. It's been a couple of years since I've actually played Breath of the Wild, but like it's clearly the first two references are from Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time, which makes sense. All the timelines fall from there, but it's the reference to Steeped in Shadow, Steeped in Twilight, which is very clearly a reference to Twilight Princess. So that is why I very firmly believe that it has to be down here in the adult timeline. Sorry, not the child era. I always get the names confused, but I really firmly believe it's there. Now, a major theory that a lot of people have is that it ends up being, the combined timeline, because Ganondorf did die here. I forget exactly what happens. I think he probably ends up killed in this one, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, now he ends up killed here. He ends up and then revived. He ends up killed here. So there's that. But the question is, what happens? I think it's here. I think what happened was Ganondorf, or because Ganondorf doesn't even seem particularly powerful. Like, it seems that after Ganondorf was defeated, Demise separated himself from Ganon and became Calamity Ganon. Especially after he got resurrected by dark magic and basically as a puppet. That probably messed with him a bit. So I think that's kind of what happened there. Now, the question is, a lot of people say that it's the unifying one because there's elements from, the other two timelines, but it's the same world, and it seems likely that there'd be the same names. Now, some of the big things, like the existence of the Rito, because in the adult timeline, you see the Zora evolved into the Rito, whereas in the child era, that didn't happen. Also, you see the Kokiri evolve into the Korok in the adult era. So, and you see those both in the Breath of the Wild. However, you also see the Zora, which is interesting because Zora don't exist in the adult era, but they do in the child era. And I'm not entirely sure about the downfall era, the downfall timeline, probably. Now that one gets a little weird. It's possible that the Rito somehow managed to evolve as well. Yeah, it's certainly possible that happened. Now, before Breath of the Wild came out, I thought for sure it was a unifying one, and like no one thought that. And then after it came out, I'm like, oh, never mind, it's not the unifying, and like everyone thought it was. But if it was a unifying one, I don't see why Zelda wouldn't have mentioned the Hero of Winds or any of the number of heroes from the Downfall timeline, which I'm not super familiar with. So I can't really say too much about that. I know a little bit about a couple of them, but yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with the basic story. I've watched a few videos like this one before. So yeah, I would put it firmly right there at the bottom of the child era, the child timeline. It's just got to be from everything I can figure. Now we'll probably know more when the new sequel to Breath of the Wild. Forget what it's called, but Breath of the Wild 2 is just kind of what I've been calling it, and what I know a lot of people call it. So yeah. We'll see how my theory holds out on where it goes, but that's basically how I see the timeline. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Let's switch over so you just see me. Subscribe to the channel for more videos. I don't do a whole lot like this one. I mostly do Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 stuff. But hey, if you enjoy D&D 3.5, give me the subscribe and check out my videos. Maybe ring that notification bell for some notifications. But anyways, as always, I'm Mitch, and I'll be seeing you